It is almost impossible to grow up in North America without knowing to some extent the importance of the bee. Exposure to this complex creature comes in many forms, such as seeing them on the jars of sweet honey you put on your biscuit, on the yellow flower by your mailbox, or even the animation of them in the almost infamous Bee Movie. The importance of bees cannot be overestimated, and our general knowledge of them today is still growing. The most common bees seen in North America belong to the family Apidae, which includes several types of bees, including cuckoos, carpenters, digger, bumble, and honeybees. Within this large family, we will be taking a closer look into the subfamily Apidae, which narrows down further into the digger, bumble, and honeybees. The majority of bees, approximately 60 to 70% of them, dig holes in the ground, while the rest nest in cavities such as those we normally see in nature. There are 4,000 species of native North American bees, while the genus Xylocopa, the carpenter bee, being the largest native bee. While the family Apidae bee is a marvel all of its own, we will primarily be looking at the honeybee more. In contrast to the quick sketch you may make of a honeybee on a flower in your notebook, the anatomy of the bee, both internally and externally, is actually quite complex and specific to the primary function of the bee itself. The three primary regions in order are the head, thorax, and abdomen. If you zoom in, you can see that the head contains compound eyes, which are able to see polarized light, meaning they basically have night vision. Protruding from the front of a head is a pair of antennae, which are bent slightly for the purpose of feeling the surface upon which the bee has landed. Above this pair of antennae is the smaller eyes called the ocelli, which aid navigation. At the bottom of the head is the mandible used for defending itself, shaping beeswax, and eating. A distinguishing detail between the bee and worker bees is the specific shape of the mandible due to differing diets. The jaw of worker bees' mandibles are used to open the anthers and stamens of flowers to collect pollen, while the proboscis, or the long tongue, used to suck up liquid. This tongue can also be infested with larvae. Moving on to the thorax, we are able to see a pair of large forewings, and behind them another pair of smaller hind wings. Like all the other insects, the honeybee has 6 legs, which are useful not only for movement, but for when the antenna becomes too full of pollen, the bees utilize their many legs to clean the antenna by rubbing them together. In addition, the back legs have structures called pollen baskets, which help maximize pollen carrying capacity for every trip made. The feet of bees have little claws useful in standing up on rough surfaces and smooth pads for standing on smooth surfaces. Finally, we move on to the abdomen, where the famous stripes and barbed stinger are contained. The barbed stinger is specific to the honeybee, which upon stinging in self-defense, the bee dies, as the barb remains stuck in its target, while the bee simultaneously flies away, still connected to the stinger, until it rips out of their body. For the internal anatomy, we will start from the mouth, which is also known as the food canal. Most food that passes through here is liquid, and sucked up via a labium, or the floor of the mouth. Following the mouth is the pharynx, which contains muscles that move the labium to suck the nectar. Near this is the hypopharyngeal gland, which is where the ingredients of the royal jelly production are found. Moving on, we see the flight muscles, which are in the thorax, aid in flying and beat an astonishing 230 times per second. In contrast to our own system, the circulatory system of the bee is open. The blood freely flows through the body cavity and is pumped by the heart. The respiratory system is similar to our own in that it contains hollow tubes connected to air sacs. One can imagine how small these air sacs must be. Most digestion takes place in the midgut. In the digestion system, there is also the proventriculus that stores honey and nectar without it being digested for later use. In worker bees, the wax glands produce wax up to 12 days after birth and stop producing this wax 6 days later, explaining why the queens must continue to lay eggs in such large amounts. These are not the only glands, however, as there are also the venom gland and sac where the venom is produced and stored. Similar to ancient societies, the modern bee society has a strict hierarchy. The status of the bee is determined in its reproduction, and there are 3 primary roles to which it can be assigned. The queen, who is essentially in charge of keeping the colony populated, as she is the sole egg layer. Workers, who get the pollen, make the honey, care for the young, and are exclusively female, or drone bees, who mate with queens and are exclusively male. Unlike many organisms, the queen is unique in that she can lay both diploid and haploid eggs, and this process starts from the drones, all of which are male, from several other hives gathered approximately 60 feet above the ground. The queen then proceeds to mate with a multitude of drones from different hives. In a specialized organ called a spermatheca, she collects the sperm from the drones. Back in the hive, she then lays about 2,000 eggs, of which she can choose to fertilize or not. This decision determines the gender of the future bees, as unfertilized eggs grow to be male, while fertilized eggs grow to be female. After 3 weeks, the eggs finish growing inside the queen, and she lays them where they will soon hatch after 3 days. The larvae that hatch will continue to grow for 5 days. The females will further develop into either worker bees or queens based on the jelly fed to them by the worker bees. The bees really take the phrase, "you are what you eat," literally. After the larva phase, they transition to the pupa phase for approximately 15 days, during which additional hormones are released and the bee develops its complex organs. For a quick recap, the eggs inside the queen take 21 days to mature. She lays them and they take 3 days to hatch and become larvae. The larvae grow for 5 days and has a pupa phase for 15 days. And then you got yourself an adult bee. All in all, for such a tiny organism, we sure do owe a lot to the humble bee. We hope to have shown you in this short time how wonderful all these bees are and how they do so much more than just provide us honey. You would not believe how different our lives would be without them.